And then here we go. So glad to have you all on here. We've had a pretty good response, and so we've got 30 to 35 at a minimum right now, so guests, and so that's pretty good. And this is our second of 3 that we're doing, and had a great response to the first one as well. Do another one next month with a whole different batch. And obviously this is trying to meaningful engagement around topics that matter to our city, to our community, and matter to our kids, the kids that we serve. And so thanks for contributing to that, as well. And Jackson will follow up with each of you tomorrow and trying to follow up with your address. We'd like to send a follow-up note, just a small thank you token of appreciation too. So kind of watch for his email, and if you wouldn't mind hitting him back with your whatever best address to mail stuff to get to you. So, hey, Jackson, I know you're on with your video screen there, but can you refresh my memory on our guest and panelists, or not our panelists, but our guests, on kind of the trigger point of how to know when folks are starting to trickle in? Or
yeah, it'll show us participant list. So we've already got some people coming in here.
I see that now. I see Allison, and there we go. Connie and Chris. All right. Yeah, I pulled it up. Thanks.
Of course.
And I'm going to launch our poll for today. So if you're an attendee, or obviously any of our panelists as well, I've got a poll we've launched, and then also our chat room check. Put in the chat room your first job. What was that? What was that first job that you can remember? And I mean, something that maybe was outside of Northern Indiana where I grew up. We were made to shovel snow. It was to live in the house, you had to shovel snow, and that was just a rite of passage. So I wouldn't call that a job. That was a requirement to exist in the house. But so something maybe a step above that, if you want to share something that was a first job for you. Got a lot of guests join us. Thank you all for jumping in. If our attendees want to take some time and put your first job in the chat room, and also there's a poll that's live right now. We'd love to have you answer that poll. We'll leave it open for 10 or so minutes. Let's wait a couple more minutes here. We've got a lot of guests starting to trickle in, and we'll get started.
For the record, Aaron, it does say it that I misunderstood initially. It said host and panelists cannot vote. Oh,
okay. Well, your opinion matters to me, but it doesn't matter in this poll. So I stand corrected on that. We've got some good ones here. Baseball stand concession worker, babysitting. That's a good classic. I put detasseling. That was, I did that for about 2 weeks. That was about all I could handle. That'll speak to kind of where I grew up. Clerk filing papers. Somebody worked at Panera. Good one. Family farm. It's a detasseling too if you worked on a family farm. Mowing lawns, Knights of Columbus. It's great, Brandon. Babysitting, Italian restaurant. Shoveling pea gravel at a home construction site. Dave, that's some work. That's some work. So I filled in a few footers for my dad over the years. You earned a rite of passage. There you go. Well, we'll get so we've got attendees all trickling in, but we'll leave the poll open and get going here. Welcome to everybody that's on here so far, and as you're hopping in, put that first job in the chat room. Take a minute to answer the poll. But if we've not met before, my name is Aaron Story. I work with Elevate Indianapolis. We're about a 6-year-old nonprofit here committed to building long-term life-changing relationships with urban students here in our city. We're a mentoring and education nonprofit based on a 40-year-old model out of Denver and here in Indianapolis the last 6 years. Today, we're hosting the second of 3 webinars, Moving From Bandaids to Solutions. We have a 1-hour conversation. Today is gratefully sponsored by the One America Foundation, so thank them for making this possible. We had our first 20 guests, I think, Jackson, if I'm right, first 20 guests who had signed up, got a Chipotle gift card. So it is a true lunch and learn for some of you. You're eating Chipotle while you're joining us. And so hopefully you're having fun doing that. We'll do our best to stick to our 1-hour time frame, knowing a lot of our folks are at work or watching kids as this virtual homeschool cold learning day and kind of covering a lot of bases, but we're glad you could be on. It's a roundtable discussion. This is, as I said, the second and third we're doing. We have panelists that jump in around a topic that pertains to students living in economically disadvantaged communities. A lot of the kids that Elevate Indianapolis serves that would benefit from the insights and guidance wisdom of panelists here, as we've had in our prior one, we'll have again next month. Specifically today, our panel geared towards discussing equitable workforce development and placement for young people in our city, specifically students that are not going that, what we would kind of call that traditional 2 to 4 year college route. So what's another pathway? What are the other pathways for them? And then how do we continue to think through and have meaningful dialogue around creating equitable opportunities for development and placement for the kids that we serve, that maybe just that 4-year college isn't for them, or maybe they feel like there's 5 better options for them, and how do we discuss those to make sure that they can be equipped to be aware of those opportunities to move ahead. Our goal today for all of our panelists is to have meaningful, rich conversation around this topic and just kind of probably cut the surface a little bit. But for our guests, to glean a couple of very clear takeaways to be part of a solution. The goal of this is kind of, we say, moving from Band-Aids to solutions. So we want everybody to be able to see, wherever you're an educator, a business owner, whether you work in government, whatever your role or lane is that you serve our city, to identify 1 or 2 or more ways that you can take away to be a part of an active solution wherever the lane that you've been placed. And so whether that be an organization that's here represented on this panel, whether that be an idea that you can infuse into your business or to your nonprofit or to the agency that you serve in our city, that's our hope. That's our hope. And so we'll do a quick intro of our guests. I'll let each of them introduce themselves, and as a panelist, if you would, kind of share your name, your title, how long you've been living in the Indy area, maybe a little bit of the work that you do, just as a 30-second intro. After you introduce yourself, if you would kick it over to somebody else, and you can popcorn around until we go all the way through, and then kick off our questions, kind of set the stage. So I'll start with Miss Tammy first, and then we'll go from there. Thanks, Tammy. Oh, unmute. There you go.
Okay, sorry about that. So thank you so much and welcome. Thank you for inviting me, and I feel kind of privileged to be a part of this panel. So my name is Tammy Thomas. I'm the Employment Services Manager for the Mary Rigg Neighborhood Center. I'm a native of Indianapolis, grew up here, and other than going away for school or whatever, I've lived here all my life. I've been in workforce development for a very, very long time. I think I started probably back in 2005, 2006. And I've worked with youth programs for a lot of not-for-profits, and even managed some programs within the Work One that pertain to youth, with helping them to graduate from high school, enroll into occupational skills training, post-secondary education, providing mentorships, internships, primarily a lot of youth program and design. And so, like I said, I've been in workforce development since about 2006. And so I've done a lot with youth, adults, workers, unemployed, underemployed, just a lot. So I just feel thankful that you've asked me to participate, and I hope I can share some good information with you.
Thanks, Tammy. Who would you like to pick? We'll just keep it moving.
Oh, well, see, I've got to put these glasses on. Okay, I'll just go with Brandon because he's right next to me.
My name is Brandon Powell. I'm the president of Helpful Lawn Care. Grew up in Indianapolis, 30th and Keystone area. Chittard High School, Butler University. I like blue and white. Graduated during the dot-com boom. I got on board to a startup, raised seed money, a little bit of VC money, lost everything. Started all over again, kept on doing it again. Now I'm in the lawn care business during my passion of employing people. So that's what I do. Pass it over to Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Price. I'm the president of the Indiana Construction Roundtable Foundation. I didn't grow up in Indianapolis, but I did live downtown for 11 years in the Martin Luther King Park neighborhood, and love living downtown. Also do programming throughout Indianapolis. We have workforce development programming aimed at youth, so K through 12 space, and then adults being 18 and over. So that's a little bit about me. I will pick Denny. He's below me.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Denny Armington. I am the president of Youth Opportunity Foundation. It's a Carmel-based organization. It's 3 years old, has a not-for-profit focused on initially assisting youth involved with the juvenile justice system around the country, get second chance at life through education, typically post-secondary, job opportunities and mentorship. Most recently, have focused on the Indianapolis area to assist in a development of a prevention model to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system, directed towards, again, post-secondary training and or education, jobs, and other opportunities as they present themselves. I've been in Indianapolis for 27 years, transplant from Iowa. Love the city and want to do whatever we can to help through assisting our kids to create an even better city in the future. So let me kick it to Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm David Palmer. Thanks for the opportunity, Aaron and others. I'm with an organization, not-for-profit organization called Purposeful Design. And we're also a faith-based organization trying to care for the inner person as well as the outer needs. And what we do is hire men who are coming out of addiction, prison, homelessness, etc., and train them to make handcrafted furniture, which we sell to fund the jobs. And we sell furniture to mostly large organizations like Lilly and the hospitals and universities and so forth. And let's see, Adam, please.
And that would leave me. I'm Adam Johnson. I'm the Pathways to Purpose Manager for Elevate Indianapolis. Native of Indianapolis as well, but lived in Atlanta for a couple of years, lived in New York for 2 years, graduated from IGPUI SPIA program in urban affairs, worked for the Department of Workforce Development during my last year in school, then worked as a budget analyst for a couple of years. Then ran my own business, cleaning business, successfully for about 7 years until the economy went to poop in 2008. And now, I've always worked with youth. I enjoy working with youth. I'm glad to have this opportunity to really get them on a pathway from wherever they are to helping them identify where they want to be or where they want to get in life. And it's pretty much what I do is develop that pathway for them and walk alongside of it with them, mentoring as well.
All right, let's jump into it. Thanks, Adam, and everybody. So first, we're going to set the stage a little bit as questions I had shared, and I'm just going to popcorn around and divide up the questions based on just a little random, and so everybody's going to get a chance here the next few minutes. But first of all, Gary and Brandon, if you want to just be ready to be teed up for this one. First of all, what concerns do you have about equitable practices in workforce development for young people living in our urban neighborhoods? And so just, is there a concern or two that comes to mind that maybe isn't a deep dive, but it's the first thing that comes to mind. Here's something that you think of when you think of just the challenge itself for the students that we serve in our city. So Gary obviously is a longtime educator, and Brandon, with the kind of work that the heart that you have for this as well, I thought I would just lean down to you two first.
All right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. And I'm Gary Carter. I'm the Career Academy Coordinator at George Washington High School. And when you think about equity, it kind of carries with it the weight of individual settings and individual needs and helps, assistance needed, and things like that. So I think probably one of my concerns is that there are opportunities out there, and sometimes it's easy to look at things in terms of equality. Well, it's the same for everybody. Everybody has opportunity for advancement here. Everybody can grab this job over here, but it doesn't take into account the individual needs. And so I think there needs to be more bridges to help students get from point A to point B and grab a hold of those opportunities, because the opportunities are there. I just think that we need to emphasize and maybe do a little bit better job of building those bridges through mentoring. A lot of students don't have the professional skills that I see every day in the classroom. They're getting more technical skills, but they really need a lot of help and assistance with those professional skills, showing up to work on time, and the connections that they need to develop that we kind of take as common sense, that are not common sense to everyone. And even if they are common sense, they don't put them into practice a lot. So building those bridges, I think, will create a little more equity.
Thanks, Gary. Brandon, what thoughts might you have to get us started? And what do you see as a concern?
Like anyone that young people that I interact with, I go deep pretty quick. I ask them, do you have an optimistic view of life? Like I just go, it's like, if you have an optimistic view of life, we can do great things. And I think that's going to take an authentic approach of getting to know that individual, for them to be able to break down the walls, and for it to not look like it's a program, but you're being authentic. You want to know about who they actually are. And if they're having a hard time answering that question about optimism, and then you can go deeper into that, of where they're coming from and whatnot. But I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I'm always going to go deeper to not like life skills or trade jobs or whatever. I need to go to the heart of that individual to see where they're coming from. And then we can go from there.
Thanks, Brandon. Jump in this next question. Tammy and Adam, kick this back and forth a little bit. What's a development concern, an equitable workforce development concern that you have for youth living in the city? Like what's a concern that you see for youth living in the neighborhoods and students that we serve in kind of 2021, maybe not as much 20 years ago, as much as kind of what's an immediate concern that you've observed, that just something you kind of share off with our audience between the two of you.
So I think that if we think about, just living in the neighborhoods have changed. The neighborhood I grew up in is different from neighborhoods that kids grow up in now. And it doesn't necessarily matter so much where that neighborhood was, but there's people tend to gravitate and do things based on the people that they're around. So if you're in a neighborhood that, whether it's a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, then I almost hate to use those things, but you gravitate to what's going on around you. So if you're in an area where people are working and they're progressive or they're self-supporting, you're going to strive and ascribe to do those things. If conversely, you're also in a neighborhood where people aren't doing so much, you don't see people going to work, or you don't see them doing things to be a little more progressive, then that's your norm. And unfortunately, people that grow up in some communities don't navigate beyond that community. So they don't see other things and aspire to do other things based on something that they've never seen before. So I think that is a great part of what I've noticed a lot with regard to the neighborhoods, now versus 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. I was actually reading something that talked about how people whether or not people are impoverished based on how they live. And there was an interesting study. I don't know how they decided to check mothers, but kids of mothers, depending on where they live, that their IQ level was based on where their mother lived. So for a child whose mother lived in poverty and the child lived in poverty, their IQ was like in the 90s. For a child whose mother didn't live in poverty, but the child lived in poverty, then their IQ was probably 110 or so, because the mother did not live in poverty. When the child and mother both lived in poverty, then the IQ was lower. So I think that has a lot to say, that has a lot to do with it.
That's great. And I agree a lot with you, Tammy, especially with the role model aspect. I believe our students and young people cannot do what they haven't seen. And so we have to be really aware of what are we introducing, what are we exposing our students to, or young people to, both intentionally and unintentionally. If I think the schools could be a bit more intentional in what they're presenting to the students from a pre-K level all the way through high school, and maybe developing programs that will embed it within the curriculum. If a science teacher is teaching science, why not also teach what it takes to be a science teacher? If a math teacher is teaching math at some level, why not have embedded in that curriculum what it takes to become a math teacher? There's nothing wrong with being a basketball star, but if that's all our students are seeing, and that's what they aspire to be because that's what is constantly in front of them, I think we're doing a disservice to them. I think both the role models within the community, in the service centers, in the churches, in the schools, and in their neighborhood, we need to step up and show them what it takes, just as Tammy was saying, what it takes to be successful, what that pathway looks like to achieve something that's actually attainable. If I could say one last point, I think it's ironic how if you ask a young person, a child, first, second grade, what do you want to be? And they'll say, I want to be an astronaut, president, lawyer, doctor. And as they go through their educational career, by the time they get to high school, they're saying, I just want to graduate. Something along that path, along that journey has changed. And I think it's just not just exposure, but I believe it also to be confidence, not instilling the confidence in them that you can become this and that as you go through life.
Thanks, Adam. Before I jump in, I'm going to lean to Chris and David for this next question to think through. Just as a reminder to our guests, if you have a question you want to put out, you can put that in the chat room, as well. And we'll look towards some Q&A at the end as any of these dialogue points come up and you want to engage with them, ask a question. We're going to save 10 minutes at the end to make sure we address any questions that we can, the best we can. And we'll kind of dip through those as time allows at the end. But third question for Chris, and then Dave, if you want to jump into this, just from your specific perspective, again, from the seat that you sit in, the kind of perch that you're in, what's the job marketplace like today for people who didn't take the college pathway, or for young people who are not going to? So either you're currently in the workplace, or we've got about 47 Elevate seniors this year. And for those kids that are asking, hey, I'm not geared towards a 2 to 4 year college, what's the opportunities look like for me? How has the pandemic impacted that? Has you seen that in the last year? Or has there been enough impact? And that can be yours to decide to share. If you want to connect that to just your current lane and share for us as well. So Chris, we'll go to you, and then whenever you're done, Dave, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'll start out with, so I work in the construction industry and was pretty concerned because we have lived through recessions before and downtimes as an industry. But, since the pandemic hit, our industry is really thriving. We have residential construction, which is near record levels. Companies are really struggling to meet the demand in residential construction. Commercial construction is steady, and highway construction, as it's been reported in the news, is holding steady, but there's a lot more investment that we're anticipating on future infrastructure for highway construction. So construction industry is booming. we were already going into the pandemic. The state was reporting that as an industry, there were 146,000 jobs that we would need to fill over the next few years. So that problem really has only been exasperated since the pandemic started and the market's grown. I think if I'm a high school student and I'm not necessarily on that 4-year path, there are pathways in the industry that do require a 4-year degree, but a lot of the industry doesn't require that. Skilled trades positions, for the most part, do not require any kind of college credit or college coursework leading into it. But the advantage of going through an apprenticeship program in construction is that you can earn your associate's degree while you do it. So if you're in a union apprenticeship, you're going to walk away with an associate's degree through Ivy Tech. Through the non-union pathway, you'll earn an associate's degree through Vincennes. So there's still that connectivity to the college degrees, and a person can get into a skilled trade and advance however they want. So there's definitely an opportunity. I would also like to add that through our adult program, where we're actually training people and placing them into jobs, the average wage of our graduates 6 months after they complete the course is $20.58 an hour. That's your starting wage 6 months after completing a basic training course, and that's a livable wage. So just to start out, you can start out with a livable wage and then advance in your career and make upwards of $60,000 to $100,000 a year.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, that does sound really good, Chris. Way to go there. I wanted to add to what Adam said to it about the pro basketball players. Where I live on the Near East Side, in the Brookside neighborhood, there's a lot of youth that would love to end up being a pro basketball player. And if not that, maybe a producer of YouTube videos or a rapper. That's a lot of the heart that I hear about around here. And in our organization, we target the folks that are really the least desirable. That's just who we target. Coming right off the street or out of the homeless mission or right out of prison. Not too long ago, I asked we had just hired a new person for our production of furniture work. And I asked the production manager who did the hiring, how do you feel about the new guy? And he said, he thought for a second, and then he smiled. He said, he's perfect. He's a former addict and he has no skills. So that's the kind of person that we target. But so when we think of this, and from the people I talk to, it is the big issue from my vantage point isn't are there jobs? It's is the person prepared to show up and perform the job? That's what we see. And so what we try and do is create an extra cushioned start for some people, an extra long on-ramp, if you will, so that showing a little extra grace, maybe that some employers wouldn't be prepared to extend, and add to that a lot of encouragement and just helping folks think about some life habits and maybe things that it's time to leave some things behind, habits or relationships, and step into the new. So we see that that is an extra long on-ramp that's needed, and sort of like many of us probably had, I guess we identified already in your question, Aaron, that some of us had a sort of a practice job in high school or middle school. And that's basically, I think, what we offer folks, a sort of a practice entry point job, and maybe they'll end up going to Chris Price and get a good construction job after us.
That's a great, thanks, Dave, for both sharing about purposeful design a little bit and the heart behind that, and also just kind of leaning into the question. I'm going to transition to our next question, thinking about 20, 30, 40 years, kind of what's changed. And I'm going to kind of lean back towards kind of Tammy and Adam, and then Denny, I'm coming to you after that for this next one. But before I do, just even as you started to allude to, to the point of that chat room check-in. So if you're on the panel and you haven't shared your first job, please do. What's that first job? And I think that's one of the challenges, and of kind of one of the challenges, kind of economic, but then also education model today is sometimes it's a barrier to first jobs for some students. And, when I was a kid, and this is, I don't say it's the glory days, but that's just the reality when I was a kid, Memorial Day to Labor Day. And, I could work for 3 months, and whether that's detasseling or whatever that job was, there was just a very clear period at which somebody could get that first job. And obviously, now in our city, a lot has changed. Both there's different education models or different timeframes. There's, one of the perks of having so many choices is great for kids, but from an employment standpoint, it can be a real barrier to know who am I hiring, when it's their availability, what are their hours of school, what's their availability of school, who has a spring break, who has a fall break, who has a 8-week, 10-week summer break versus who has a 4-week summer break. All of those challenges from an employment standpoint, not to mention the challenges for a lot of our kids of having to watch siblings at home or having to go through the hoops they have to often just to exist, lack of transportation. It creates a real challenge to get that first job under the age of 18. So when you kind of put all that package together, a lot of our kids have barriers to that first time starter job, maybe outside of babysitting or whatnot, as Lindsay just shared and as Tammy had shared. It could be a challenge. And so how do you cut your teeth on, I remember I was fired from a job early on. It's like, well, that was a great experience for me. As painful as it sounds, that was really good because you need to learn, well, how do you keep a job and then how can you lose a job? Well, that's a good thing to learn before you have a mortgage or before you have to learn, some of that the hard way when you get older. And so I think, I think about some of that. But before we jump on, Tammy, I'll go to you first and then back to you, Adam. What has changed as you see it? Kind of a quick overview of 20, 30, 40 years. Tammy, you mentioned this already, so I want to come back to you this. For a young person living in some of the neighborhoods of students that we serve, whether it be Hallville or 38th and Post or kind of 46201 or the Martindale Brightwood area or any neighborhood you're familiar with, whatever you fill in the blank, Tammy, what's changed? You mentioned it's different today from, when you were growing up, so to speak, but what has changed specifically? A couple of things maybe our guests wouldn't be as aware of when they think of that.
When I think about the neighborhoods and kind of what's changed, number one, just thinking in terms of a neighborhood, what really is a neighborhood? Because I think that people just kind of live places now, particularly young people, they're couch surfing and they don't have a place to call their base. I call my neighborhood my base. And what was different about my neighborhood, and I'm sure many of you on the panel will identify with this, was, my neighborhood was everybody. So no matter where I was, if I was down the street at one of my best friend's house, everybody on my street and the next street, everybody knew everybody. So when you think about exposure in those models, our neighborhood was everything. My parents weren't formally educated. My parents were blue collar workers, but some of my best friends, their parents, maybe their mom was a teacher, maybe their dad was a teacher, maybe one parent, they were parents, they were families, they were siblings. And so that was part of what the neighborhood was like. And so if anything bad happened in the neighborhood, everybody knew what happened in the neighborhood. When I wrecked my mom's car around the corner and tried to sneak the car back home, before I got the car home, Mr. Horton, whose yard I ran into, was already at the front door with my dad, explaining, I don't know what happened, how she got your car. I was just learning to drive, but my plan was not going to work. So there was some accountability from other people in the neighborhood. And there was some shame attached to, some of the things that you didn't do. There wasn't a lot of drugs in the neighborhood, at least not that I was aware of. There wasn't a lot of crime in my neighborhood, not that I was aware of. There just weren't these kinds of things going on. And I grew up right on the east side of Indianapolis in zip code 46218, which is a high crime area right now. But when I grew up there, quite honestly, my family was the first minority family that lived there, but the neighborhood was just different. It was just a whole different environment. So that was my safe place. So now for a lot of young people to be safe, they kind of need to come out of their neighborhood, to find a safe place to be sometimes. Go back to thinking about role models. My role models were people that were close to me, that I had an opportunity to know. I was, one of the people that I admired might have been Diane Carroll from the Julia Show. I was never going to meet her. She was a nurse. My mom was a nurse's aide. That was the closest thing to a nurse that I could put my hands on and attach to. So that was my role model. She was in my neighborhood. If I wanted to be a teacher, I had teachers in my neighborhood. So neighborhoods are changed because they don't offer individuals maybe some of the positive reinforcements and exposures that are needed.
Thanks, Tammy. Adam, what do you think, just quickly on changes over the course of decades?
First thing that comes to mind is growing up, working fast food and retail were more so optional, was an option for us. I think today's youth, that's kind of what they're relegated to now. And before, you know, you would take a fast food job, start on fries and work your way up to be a manager or something. And now it's, you know, you get in there and you're working fries, and that's the extent of it. You know, before you know it, you're moving on to the next fast food or retail job. And I don't see the advancement taking place in fast food and retail and jobs for youth like I used to see, like I was accustomed to. And I think that something that organizations can do and be deliberate about is, I'm all about, you know, giving the skills and the opportunities to young people. So why not McDonald's take the opportunity to, you have more than just managers and fries and cashiers and so forth. You have accountants, you have lawyers, you have marketing departments within your huge organization. So why not take 2 hours a week out of the 15, 16, 20 hours a week that young person is working with you and upskill them, train them, give them opportunities to learn and be skilled for opportunities in the future. So one of the biggest things I see different is really that those opportunities to move up within an organization, within companies, and with your first or second job, they don't seem as viable.
Thanks, Adam. Hey, Denny, so this next one here, I'm going to come over to you for a little bit as you have thoughts on how have companies changed in their view of training, skills, competencies needed for young people entering the workforce. So what comes to mind? And then Chris, if you want to chime in on that one too, as your perception of what's changed, of what companies' expectations are, what are the needed skills or training or competencies before they even enter the workforce, versus the back half as to, well, to maybe into, you know, Dave talked about their model is a very unique model, but they don't necessarily want any skills. We're going to train you with everything we need. That may not be the more common practice among companies, but I'd be curious as to, Denny, your thoughts, and Chris, to share with our guests. What do you view has changed, you know, on the perception of what's needed before they can plug and play into the workforce? Again, this non 2 to 4 year college route.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Aaron. My background is hospital administration. So, you know, my ongoing fear, because it was dependent upon our workers to provide the service, that you always had enough nurses and or physicians and or people to lab techs, et cetera. And that was dependent upon people's having the appropriate skills. And things are changing so quickly now. And it's the knowledge base, I think, is turning over every 5 years now. And certainly that is accelerated exponentially since I grew up. My first job was delivering newspapers at the age of 9. So, and this goes back to Tammy's question. The other thing that I'm concerned about is I'm not certain that because of all the opportunities to get stimulation, whether it be kids, adults, et cetera, is more inwardly focused than it is outwardly focused. We used to go out and play baseball from during the summers when I wasn't delivering papers, from sun up to sundown. My only instruction from my mother was to be home by dinner if I wanted to eat. So getting back to your question about labor forces, what I see changing is that there needs to be an acceleration of skills acquisition. You see a lot of this by state in the skills gap piece, and where do you find opportunities either to encourage those folks to get training and or people with the training already inherent in their background and or experience. And I appreciate Chris's recognition of either internships or in construction industry, the apprenticeships, and there seems to be a whole lot more, whether it be federal or state support for those opportunities. And I think that it's a matter of matching the interest of our youth with the opportunities. And I think that goes back to is what do we celebrate as a community? You know, being pro basketball star is wonderful, and and or a rapper, as David mentioned. But not everybody's gonna be an NBA star or a very successful rapper. So I think we need to, as a community, embrace, celebrate the people that make this community work, and thus give kids not only the opportunity but the interest and the confidence to step into these roles to support the growth of Indianapolis.
Thanks, Denny. Chris, what have you seen changed in view of training, skills, competencies needed for young people to enter the workforce? Like, just what's the view kind of shift been like, if you feel like there has been one in the last 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I think the biggest change for the construction industry is mostly around recruiting and where we're finding people and how we're developing those people who are able to work in the industry. The industry's had a black eye for a while as being that good old boys network where you have to know somebody to get in, and we've operated that way for a long time. Where if you had a foreman on your concrete crew and he was doing really good work and his neighbor wanted to get into that crew, well, then that was his in. And as a result, our industry really underperformed when it came to recruiting women, when it came to recruiting more minorities into the workforce. And now the employers are seeing that doesn't work. There aren't all these people that they have to be more innovative with the way that they train and recruit people. So I'm seeing kind of a shift from employers looking at those soft skills. They're looking for people who will who will work hard, show up on time, and maybe as they're recruiting those people, less emphasis on college degrees, on having no background, no criminal background. So I think there's more opportunities. It's just trying to work through some of the job readiness programs and preparing people for those careers is the challenge.
Thanks, Chris. Shifting it back to Brandon and Gary here, this last question of this kind of focus on our city and environment. Has workforce development, quote unquote, kept up in central Indiana for young people not first going to college? That kind of mantra. And then what are the challenges for companies looking for prepared workforce today? So what are the challenges you think they are for companies looking for, kind of even as Chris started to allude to? But then just as your perception, has there been a keeping up that's occurred for workforce development for the students that we serve? And if you share yes or no, would you cite, hey, here's what my perception has been or my observation has been? Go ahead, Brandon.
And this is just fully my opinion. I don't think that the school system has prepared youth to be truly self-sufficient. We've shoved down that college is everything. So if you don't have college, that you're not going to be successful, and successful is totally subjective. So we're shoving out a tremendous amount of youth every year into the workforce. They're unprepared, and that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, there's a lot there.
What's a challenge for companies? Shift that to the back into the question, Brandon. Thanks. But what are companies? What are the challenges from looking for prepared workforce? Like, what's a practical challenge or two that you see? Company, they want to grow. They've got a niche they're filling, or whatever industry they're in. But here's the challenge they have to have a workforce that's ready.
Personally, there's a philosophy or something called hire all. Like, you hire anyone who's in front of you. And you're going to have to give them a tremendous amount of grace of where are they coming from. They might not have the skills, but you're going to hire all. That's a philosophy that I work on. Again, I'm not sure that truly answers your question. So
can I chime in on that as well, Aaron?
Sure.
I have a concern that, thank you, that I think a lot of corporations and entities have too high expectations for the workforce that they're trying to bring on, that they're purely looking at diploma and experience and not looking enough at maybe just the soft skills that are necessary to do a job, and then bringing them in that hire all type and be able to upskill them and get them to the point to where they're functioning and are a viable asset to the organization. So I somewhat agree with that premise that Brandon is sharing as well.
So
like 2 cents. Oh, I'm sorry, Gary.
no, go ahead.
Continue.
Go ahead.
I was going to go a half a cent more because we work directly with participants or people that are looking for employment and directly with employers. And what I've determined with my years working in workforce development is that gradually and slowly employers are shifting that we have to have someone that has a particular degree, associate or bachelor's degree, because quite frankly, those people don't exist. And for companies that have job descriptions, what I call a job description is a wish list. Because even if you think about your own organizations or any jobs that you've ever applied for, there's this job description that a business puts out, and it's got maybe 15, 20 different things on there. There's never one person that is a wish list. That's who that employer would like to hire. So then what needs to happen is when people apply for jobs, and we encourage some people, depending on, not so much young people, but some adults, apply for jobs that maybe you don't check off everything, because there's a wish list, but then there's what the real job is. And then in addition to that wish list, at the bottom is other duties as assigned. And often those other duties as assigned takes over the entire job. When in fact, a lot of people for the jobs that they're looking for don't necessarily need a college degree, but maybe they need a vocational or certificate training, and they can do the job they complete the job that has all those items from the wish list right there. So I think that employers are now starting to see that we can hire based on skill, abilities, willingness to learn. A lot of employers would much rather hire somebody that's willing than somebody that's got a lot of certifications or a lot of degrees, because not anybody, but we can read and take tests and earn degrees, but are we willing to learn? Are we willing to be a part of a team? Can we communicate well with our employer? I would just say this and kind of with regard to Chris and the Construction Roundtable, they do an excellent job at doing exactly that, meeting people where they are. And maybe they're people that ordinarily would have not worked or not thought about apprenticeships or working in construction, but they're being very well trained and they're getting those jobs that's allowing them to make a living wage. So I think that college may not be the path for everybody, but schools need to or have programs, vocational programs, where maybe someone like Chris or any one of our organizations that do workforce development jobs can come in and say, these are some additional options for you. If college isn't for you, because college isn't for everybody, or maybe it's not for everybody right now, these are some viable options for you.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Gary, you get the last word on this section. We'll move into the next section.
IPS, okay? Look no further than IPS. If you want to see, have we kept up? No, but we're catching up, okay? And you look at the different programs, and I think, Chris, you've been involved maybe with tech a little bit, with construction. And the idea behind the career academies with IPS is that 8th graders will choose what high school they go to based on the career academies they have. So for example, at George Washington, we have business, we have IT, and we have manufacturing, engineering, and logistics. And we always talk about the SKI model: skills, knowledge, experience, and exposure. And sometimes the exposure is finding out what I don't want to do. And that's just as important as finding out what you do want to do. And so we really bring in a lot of speakers. We prepare kids with interview skills. We prepare kids with resume writing skills and things like that. All of those things technically, as well as the professional skills, so that they are prepared. And we talk to our kids too about college for a purpose. There's got to be a reason. If your career pathway requires traditional 4-year college, then you need to do that. But again, I like what Tammy said. It's all about the skills. I grew up in rural Michigan, and I remember my grandpa years ago saying, when you get out there, you just roll up your shirt sleeves and you don't complain and work hard. And I thought, well, yeah, but they want a piece of paper. Well, that was years ago. And I'm starting to really see the shift back to that of like, yeah, you know what? Just roll up your shirt sleeves, get skilled up in an area, work hard, and somebody's going to pay you for it. So I think in answer to your question, I don't know that we've kept up, but I think we're catching up.
Beautiful, Gary. I definitely echo that and have seen that the last few years of my involvement, last 10 years or so, serving with IPS students. Landing the plane here, looking at solutions, like what are elements of solutions? And so this first one, less lengthy answers, more just aspects need to be included. And so, because I want everybody to give a quick answer on this. what are elements essential for permanent solutions in our community, whether you address education, government, or business. So whatever our guests, whether they're business owner, working government and nonprofit, community member, as you see, what are elements essential for permanent solutions? What has to be present for equitable workforce development and placement to occur? So what has to be present? What's an element? So I'll go to example, and maybe I'll steal Adam's thunder, but if not, he can find something else, and I'll turn it over to somebody else. For me, it's relationships. I see a ton of innovation. I hear this with business and all these great ideas, great opportunities, but people don't have relationships with the folks that are actually needing the employment. So you see innovation on one side and the outcomes never match the innovation because there's great ideas, but there's not a relational bridge to get them to the right people who need to see, hear, and experience those great ideas. So I'll just say relationships. I'll go down to Chris, and then Chris, you pick somebody. We'll dip through this one, and then we'll start to land.
Yeah, I like what you said about relationships. I think there's got to be connectivity to a program and to an industry that can provide a livable wage. There's got to be a demand for what you're doing. The other thing I would say is accountability. There's a lot of programs out there. We all need to be held to a standard. And if a program's not performing, if you're not meeting the needs, then we need to make changes to the program. So accountability and demand. I'll kick it to Brandon.
Relationship is everything. I think, but before we even get to the point of employing people, we need to go take a step back and see where they're coming from. And for me, when we were talking about, I know this is too long, but when Tammy was talking about neighborhoods and whatnot, a lot of us were hitting on something that we just didn't bring up. A lot of the youth that are coming out there have no parents. They have the parents, sometimes you have to parent the parent. They don't have a foundation to actually know what work actually is. So when we can have programs, we can do this, but if they don't have that support arm of understanding how to be self-sufficient, a lot of it is, to me, that's the root of it. So, yeah.
Pick anyone you want, Brandon.
I'll send it to Tammy.
I can't. Okay, I couldn't unmute. Okay, so we all are talking about relationships and all of that. I think that in a nutshell, there needs to be collaboration. There needs to be a collaboration between the educational partners, between employers, and we've got to bring in those community-based organizations, because the community-based organizations are going to help with those life skills and those emotional traumas or things that are going to prevent them from actually being able to function and navigate through the educational process and to be able to work with the job. So I think that, and part of what we do at Mary Rig is build relationships with us, with training providers and employers, because you've got to begin with the end in mind and then work it backwards and figure out what parties need to be present to make all of it work. So I just think that there needs to be greater collaboration with community, education, employers, and even the public service officials, the police departments, hospitals, addressing mental health. There's just got to be better collaboration. And I will send it to, I got my glasses on so I can, to Denny.
Thanks, Tammy. I would echo what I'm hearing. It seems to me like there's opportunity for an accountable system that has common goals, and that includes collaboration, communication, and commonalities with the kids. The kids have got to be directing us in terms of being participants in this process. We can't dictate it to them. They've got to participate it to enable them to move forward. David, keep going to you. How about it?
Sure. Yeah, I will echo what Brandon said. I think a great starting point, a core essential, foundational essential, is good, strong families with couple good, stable parents in the home to create a foundation of stability and some good orientation. And there's plenty of cases where that's not happened. So what do we do then? And I think that there's a lot of times, at least in the environment I work in, where there's a need for almost some parenting-like relationship at work, or maybe it's mentoring relationship, but it's helping someone maybe catch up on some social skills, some character traits, as well as the job skills that needs to happen, needs to all come together.
Thanks, Dave. Who's left here? I think, Gary, you want to go ahead and then?
Sure.
I think
Yeah, I think I echo, ditto everything else. Relationship for sure is key. I think one thing that brings all of this together is a sustainable system. So what's the vehicle that you keep building relationships with? Well, it's got to be your system. How do you connect these kids with, from point A to point B, where they want to go? Well, it's got to be a vehicle, a sustainable system that people are plugging into, that 5-10 years down the road, we can still see it working because of the system. I heard somebody say one time, your system is set up perfectly for the results you're getting. So if you don't like your results, take a look at your system. So I think that kind of brings everything together. And I think there are systems being built out in certain places, certainly within the schools where I see it every day. But those talent pipelines are being built. But I think, again, the system needs to be built so that we can see it 5-10 years down the road, because it is really delayed gratification. You'll see it work 3-4 years down the road, but you started back here with the system.
Well, thanks, Gary, I'll turn over to you, Adam, to finish up. I mean, just even that, as we're talking about needs of addressing equity issues and barriers for students that we serve, if you don't like what you're seeing, analyze the system that got us to this point for decades, centuries, or however you want to view it, specifically for the students of color that we serve. There's a system that got us to this point. And so how do we address that? We dismantle how we create new systems to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be able to have a living wage, access to healthcare, access to meaningful, we say a path to purpose, because we know that purpose is a lot bigger than just vocation. So it's purpose. Here's why I'm here. Here's why I exist. You can answer that question. Vocation often just works itself out, right? Or vocation changes, but my purpose. And so I think that's a huge passion for ours. Adam, last word on this one. What's an element that you see that's important to be included?
Kids spend more hours and more time in school than any place else on any given day. Schools aren't going anywhere. Corporations aren't going anywhere. I think that partnership and that exposure for students to business entities, community partners is vital. For schools to go on partnerships with organizations like David has and like Brandon has, if we get them tied into organizations like that, expose them to those type of opportunities and find more of those. And we can find them even more readily now amongst this pandemic, because we've gone virtual with everything. The access is there now. So I think building those bridges and those relationships are vital to our students thriving during high school and after high school. And Chris, I'm not certain, I don't want to forget Chris. Chris, did you indeed, because I forgot Gary early on when I didn't popcorn to him. I want to make sure I don't know if Chris went or not.
Yep, Chris is good. One question we have, we start to wind down here. One question we have in the chat room, it's from Pete, who's a board member as well. And I want to widen this a little bit. His specific question he shared, and there's still time if anybody else wants to put in a question if you're an attendee here. With IPS's evolution to career-based curriculum in the high school, is kind of what Gary started to share. Is it adequately preparing students, urban students, for jobs in the crafts, law enforcement, healthcare, et cetera? And is IPS partnering with the groups represented in the webinar to ensure the curriculum meets the needs of these prospective enterprises? I want to widen that wider than IPS. I know Pete's questions IPS, but obviously in our city is a non-consolidated city. There's districts neighboring beside each other that, you know, IPS serves some kids, and then Beech Grove and Speedway and then Pike. And then, you know, so I think as you all see education, obviously, Gary, you can feel free to answer IPS, as you've kind of already shared some of that. But as the only person on for IPS, I don't want you to feel you've got to be the sole, you know, answer for education, you know, in general. And then to Gary's question, if somebody wants to quickly chime in, are any of you on here considered partners with IPS to kind of maintain the perspective of these industries or connections to some of what Tammy shared even a little bit already? Anybody want to jump into that, Gary or others, and talk about, are we keeping up with making those connections and adequately preparing, as you see it, the education systems?
I'll just quickly, you know, talk from my perspective. First of all, the world of career in tech ed, or CTE, if you've ever heard of that, is just exploding. And it's kind of the old vocational ed, you know, where like, oh, Johnny's not doing well he's never in college, put him in shop class. That's the old school mentality, but career in tech ed nowadays includes cybersecurity and software programming and a bunch of different things, engineering and business. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunity to connect. And yes, every career in tech ed pathway by way of the state has to have an advisory committee. And so that's one way to plug in for sure. If anybody wonders, where do I start? Where do I plug in? There's a lot of opportunities like industry challenges, you know, that students can do in a classroom, or guest speaking or mock interviews. There's a ton of different things, but one mainstay that's always going to be there is that every career pathway has to have an advisor. And so when the schools are putting those together, or career centers are putting those together, you know, you've got Area 31 over at Ben Davis. You've got the McKenzie Center, I believe, up in Lawrence. Over that, these career centers, they have all of these career programs. Well, they need advisory committee members to be able to guide them in terms of curriculum, in terms of equipment and connections to the outside. So that's one way to definitely get involved.
Thanks, Gary. Miss Jones had landed with a question I think is relevant as well, as how often do community partners engage with students within the schools to understand their needs, and who is supporting their professional development and student engagement? You know, big question as well. So kind of it's the reverse of that question, how we engage our community partners with students directly, you know, in the schools as well. And so for us, we're a bridge, as we're in IPS, we're out of IPS, we're in the community, you know, we do community neighborhood development work, but yet obviously we're directly with students. And we're developing a P2P, or Pathway to Purpose committee that we want area business owners to serve on, to make sure specifically we design programming that's relevant for engagement with our students directly for what's relevant in the fields. And so we can stay in touch with the stuff we're designing for the next year. But anybody else want to chime in on that? It's 12:58. We'll wind down the next couple of minutes. But as your perception of your engagement, maybe Chris, what's it look like to engage with schools and students directly that are tomorrow's workforce, so to speak, or if anybody else wants to speak on that too. Thanks, Ms. Jones.
Yeah, we engage with schools in a couple different ways. One is just organizing industry around the state for guest speaking opportunities to high school students. So we do that throughout the year, and we're required to meet with 20,000 people per year as a part of our contract with the state, and we're able to meet that every year. So we do quite a bit of that. But you know, I think one of the most impactful things that we have been involved with that school engagement, and what we do with IPS, what we recently started with IPS, is that work-based learning component, where you're really working with the students, you're finding out what their interests are, and then you're going out and seeking employment opportunities for them as a part of their work-based learning experience in high school. Now, in doing so, we actually require the employers to pay a minimum wage of $12 an hour. If you have a program and you're paying students $12 an hour and they're feeling valued by those employers, you're really going to see those programs grow. And we've seen that with programs that we've partnered with. So I think it's kind of going in a good direction right now.
I just want to jump in really quickly and say that, Mary Rigg was actually embedded and working with George Washington High School as part of the community schools program. And we also work with families and parents in 4 other IPS schools, 46, 49, 63, and 67, I believe. So we're actually actively trying to work within the school system just to provide some career development, work with parents for the elementary school students, work with the high school students that as they matriculate out of high school might really be interested in career development programs with us as well. We're always open to those kinds of opportunities.
That's great, Tammy. And, for us, we're looking to host our 3-day summer bridge program for our graduating seniors actually at Mary Rigg this summer, is to help create a bridge to the community center that's serving parents and families and siblings. We know it's going to take 2-3 tier approach, not just our work directly with students. Brandon, did you have something to say to wrap up? Did I cut you off? I apologize.
I guess I'm on the business side, the small business side. I will tell you, just to put it out, I think it's actually, to me, it's frustrating to actually engage on the school system sometimes. If you give me a name, I can run with it all day. Like I have contractors who are plumbers, HVAC guys, landscapers, whatever. These are $65,000, $85,000 jobs. We can't find people. And if you talk to just a small business owner and they were like, I can't find them. And I'm like, hey, so engage the schools. They're like, I don't know how to. There's a huge, I guess, a disagreement sometimes between education and business. That barrier right there, I think it's huge. And no one really wants to address it sometimes. If you go to Hope Plumbing, he put out a flyer for he needed plumbers. Couldn't find a plumber, but he put out one for a marketer, and he had 100 applications for it. No plumbers for a $100,000 job, but a marketer makes $40,000, and you still can't find enough. So in anything to deal with the trades, those guys are looking for jobs, and I believe there's a complete disconnection between getting those kids to those jobs. And we put our money what is important to us. We haven't built a trade school. We haven't built a vocational school in how long? So not to end on a bad note, but that's me when it comes to being real. So
I think that's good. It can be challenges. And I'd say I spend a fair share of my time every week talking with business owners. And we talk about Equitable standpoint. I talked to a big plumbing franchise a couple weeks ago. Paid 3-month internships, a lot of opportunity, except it's 45 minutes outside the city. So I'm just transparent, I have great kids. We have some great seniors that would be a great fit for that.
The bus.
If we have no public transit, and if they can't, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. If you can't have a car to get there, can't access the job, there are those things to work through. So part of it is just employers have to think through how they're designing these programs. Are they living wages? Are they in locations where kids can get to, or I say kids, 18, 19-year-olds can get to? Is there insurance involved? Are there benefits? I had these constant conversations with business owners. We can't keep enough cleaners. We can't keep enough fill in the blank. This is just the last 3 or 4 weeks. And some of my questions, they have to be able to live, they have to be able to work, they have to be able to take care of, responsibilities. So sometimes it's on the education side, and we're entrenched in the school. Sometimes it's, it's on the business side. Do we know what students are asking for? Hey, you don't want to be an NBA player. You want to be an NBA player. No, that's okay. Be a plumber. Well, no, actually NBA sounds a lot better, and so some of it is that, are we enough relationship guidance to be able to say, well, how do you transfer? You want to work outside, you want to work with your hands, this could be a good job for you. And so I think just navigating those conversations, which is, again, to me, goes back to relationship. There has to be enough relationship equity with businesses, schools. Ms. Jones dropped her email in. I'll say this from a business owner standpoint. We work at Washington. Gary's on here. The school is very open to working with businesses, and I know Ms. Jones is. So maybe they can't find 100 plumbers for Hope Plumbing, who I just gave about $1 billion to about 6 months ago, for our house. But can they get you in a relationship with kids that could fulfill that pathway 3, 4, 5 years from now? Absolutely, they can, and that's what they're doing, and we get to be a part of that from the Washington side, and I'm grateful to be able to work with them. But on that note, our time is ceasing up. We've got guests falling off as we speak. we can stay on for a few minutes. So anyone that can stay, drop in your questions. If you guys can stay 5 minutes, if not, as guests, feel free to hop off. If you got to get back to home education or work or whatever else the responsibility is in this cold winter day, feel free to hop off as well. But a special thanks to all of our panelists again. Great, rich conversation. Very grateful to have each of you on here, and I know just cut the surface of what it looks like for us to build equitable workforce development and placement.
Thanks.
And I'm going to stop the recording and see if anybody else trickles.